Welcome to Leadership Forward, where you'll meet Arizonans with innovative answers to our state's greatest challenges. I'm Dawn Wallace from the Arizona Center for Civic Leadership at the Flinn Foundation. Recent survey data from the Center for the Future of Arizona reveals that 70% of Arizonans lack the confidence in their government institutions and their elected leaders. Specifically, their willingness to work across the aisle or to stave off special interest. More startling is the data that reveals that 10% of Arizonans believe that their elected officials lack the knowledge and expertise in public policy issues that impact Arizonans today. At the Arizona Center for Civic Leadership at the Flinn Foundation, we are committed to citizen education, civic engagement, and the building of civic leadership capacity in the state of Arizona. As part of our leadership development mission, we operate the Flinn-Brown Network, consisting of over 400 civic leaders from all over the state of Arizona. These individuals serve in elected office, on boards and commissions, in local government, and on statewide organizations. They've committed themselves to the betterment of Arizona by engaging in their communities and participating actively in our democracy. I'm here with two of the coolest guys in Arizona politics, Barnes and Chad Campbell, former legislators, lobbyists, public policy experts, TV personalities, all in one. We couldn't be more lucky to have you here with us on Leadership Forward for a Better Arizona.
Good looking, Dawn. Don't forget that.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Good looking. Okay, I'll write that down for next time, Stan. So again, I want to acknowledge on the onset that it's session. Election cycle goes on forever in Arizona, and you're here with us. Thank you so much for giving us your time today.
Yeah, thank you.
So we are talking about civic leadership. It's what we do at the Center for Civic Leadership. We train individuals to enter civic life and to give contribution to issues that plague us in the state. You all are representatives of really positive civic leadership journeys. Can you start by telling me a little bit about what got you into politics, into public policy, and what keeps you here?
Would you want to flip a coin?
No, you go first.
All right, go. He's looking at me. It's great to be here, Don. I appreciate you, and thanks to Chad for being here, too. It's one of my favorite things to do. I earn a living in my hobby, and this is part of it right here. And I love telling this story about how I got elected, not only because the older I get, the more, ego it satisfies, but I think it says something about Arizona, that a 27-year-old with no previous experience could qualify for the ballot, raise a couple dollars, get his own message out, and beat two incumbents for a House race in 1988, and find himself in the legislature as the youngest person. And of course, like the dog that caught the car, wondering, now what do I do? But the story of there is a freedom in Arizona politics that if you are willing and if you are positive, you can be one of the deciding voices on the floor of the House or the floor of the state Senate. We don't have a machine, Albany style, that dictates who gets to come in and who doesn't. It's a matter of your own positive energy and your willingness to put up with the things that you need to. But when I was low but a young man, decided the farm life in Pinal County was too hard, too much work, and much to the disappointment of my father, decided that the world of ideas and not machines was where I personally belonged. In spite of my great childhood out there under a tractor in Pinal County, I'm more comfortable in politics and with people and ideas. Somehow, like the philosopher said, we become what we think about. And as a young man, I thought about it. And when the opportunity came, I didn't need anyone's permission. And I won, and here I am with you. So it's really an exciting story, I think.
Well, Chad, how about you?
Yeah, I would start by, by kind of adding to Stan's point about you don't have to come from a political family in Arizona to really get in politics, or really to get in the community, I should say. It's much more than politics, right? It's community-driven leadership. It's making a difference around the issues you care about. And so I do not have the farm story like Stan does. That is not my background. I grew up in West Phoenix, but really just the issues that I cared about were something that I kind of got involved with at the community level through nonprofits, through just working with local leaders, things like that, and really started volunteering on political campaigns with candidates that kind of aligned with my views. And then that led to me eventually making the decision to run for office myself. Now, I wasn't quite as young as Stan, but I think I was in my late 20s, early 30s when I first ran for office. And then I got elected when I was in my early 30s, my first time. Again, I did not come from a family with a political background. I'm a first generation Arizonan. I've been here my whole life, been in Phoenix for most part my whole life, and really just cared about the community. And, not saying it's good or bad to other places where there are those political machines. Personally, I would think it's a little more bad than good. But I think if you look across the board here, at local level government, all the way up to our federal elected offices, a lot of the people that are in office right now in Arizona are first time elected people that don't come from families of very politically active people. Now, there are some that do, don't get me wrong. But to Stan's point, it's a very kind of opportunistic, very open landscape here in terms of how to get involved and how to make a difference. And even though we're a big state, we're growing. I always tell people when I'm working with them, we are still a low dollar, low barrier state when it comes to entering into politics. And if you want to go to Texas or California, places like that, that's where you see a lot of money, a lot of barriers. But here, it's still kind of a very open, very community-driven process for the most part, at least.
I agree.
So would you say that if you ran today, that you would be electable?
Is that what you said?
Well, I mean, Stan wouldn't be, but I mean.
Thank you.
No,
Thank you for that.
I think you understand what I'm saying is, when you entered politics, there was a different political climate. Certainly there was, the social media wasn't there. The communities were smaller. The state didn't have the mass migration. So now we're a different state and we're a different political climate. Do you think that the same qualities that got you elected could get you elected today?
I'd like to think so, because it really, and I think this is true in Chad's story, it was less about where you stood on specific issues and more about how you evoked a certain authenticity with people that you met along the way. And they decided they liked you, so they would vote for you. I think that's the big secret and the big reveal that many people don't understand, is that people, voters in the big mass, vote with their heart and not their head. They really rarely, as a mass phenomenon, have a checklist of issue-driven things. They are more like, I like that guy or I don't like that guy. And I think in Chad's case, speaking for him, he comes off as an authentic individual trying to do right as he sees it. And that's what I tried to do as well, was say to people, we may not always agree, but I want you to know that I'm coming at this genuinely, and I'm open-minded about what is possible from my point of view about the role of government and the like. So I'd like to think we could still get elected, but where we sat in the House or in the Senate would be different philosophically, I believe, today.
Yeah, and I would agree with Stan to some degree, and then I would add this though. I do think that the political landscape is more polarized now.
Certainly.
There's a widening gap, I think, between the two sides, and I don't think that's a good thing. I think that the ability to compromise, a lot of people I don't think appreciate that any longer, at least in politics, which I find disheartening in some ways. A lot of times if you try to work with the other side now, you kind of get attacked by your base and called a rhino or a dino or whatever it is. I think that's problematic. I think in every other area of life, we look at compromise as a good thing. If you're in a relationship, if you have a spouse or a partner, when you compromise, that's a good thing, right? In your place of business, you a lot of times compromise with your coworkers. So for some reason, compromise has now become like a dirty word in politics, and it's become this zero-sum game in many cases. And I think that's true, again, in the more partisan environment. So I think that's not the case at the city level necessarily or the county level, but we see it at the state level and the federal level more. So how you get elected has changed. I would say that, Don. I'm not, and I think don't get me wrong, there's a lot of good people running for office and getting elected, but how you go about it is definitely different. And when you're in there, especially with social media, to your point, you have to be able to learn how to navigate that a little bit differently because of that kind of that bombastic element out there now in politics that really likes to make everything kind of black and white. When we know, I think Stan agrees, right? Policy is not black and white, rarely. And a lot of times it's a gray area and you have to make tough decisions. And it doesn't always end up perfect for whatever your base may be.
Yeah, your point, though, Don, is very well made. It is a different time, different legislature. Politics is different. Everything is different than when I was there and when Chad was there.
Well, we've had some recent surveying by the Center for the Future of Arizona. Every 10 years, they survey Arizonans and ask them, what is your confidence level with your public institutions and your elected officials? In 2009, 70%, went, no, thank you. We don't trust them. We don't trust their knowledge. We don't trust their willingness to work across the aisle. We don't trust their ability to stave off a special interest. In 2020, same percentage. So for the last 20 years in Arizona, you have 70%, if you believe surveys and polling, where the public is not terribly excited about the people that they elect. So if that's the case and you have a sort of passive electorate, who are we electing? Who fits that profile? And are they the leaders that we need for the state?
Yeah, the political gravity pull is for ideologues on each side, regrettably. Now, it really wasn't that way when I started. I don't think it was that way when Chad was doing it either. But that's certainly the pull. If you are an ambitious person and you feel the call to be in the public square, the first thing you're doing is feeling like all the voices are over here and they want me to be there with them in order to have support on the left and on the right. And you can't, unless you're just superhuman, it's hard to overcome giving people what they want in order to be voted into office. And so the price of being in office with social media and the like is much higher than when I was there, than when Chad was there. And so who we elect are people that are willing to pay what is a really artificially high price of public service, and who are willing to lean into that ideology on the right or the left, because we still have a primary system, and that winnows down the people that go to the general election, and the folks that win there are ones that play that game the best. It's a different time. I'll close with this point on this one. When I was in the legislature in my first caucus in the House in 1989, there were 34 Republicans, and 17 of them were happily self-described moderate Republicans. That's how they described themselves, and on the floor or back home. I'm a moderate Republican. And they won their elections on that. There's not one today in the State House that would accept that label as anything but a pejorative, really. So that's the rug that's shifted underneath us.
Yeah, I think that Stan kind of mentioned it, the primary system inherently has created, I think, a system that allows candidates and elected officials eventually to only have to worry about a very small percentage of their constituency. The way our maps are drawn, right, for most part in most districts, both at the state and federal level, if you get through your primary, you're going to be safe in the general election because the districts are so partisan, leaning in one way or another. So really, you're probably only worried, if you're looking at it from a perspective of trying to get reelected, you're probably only really worried about having to kind of appease or please about 25% of your voting population in order to get reelected. That's problematic. And at the same time, though, I tell this all the time, you can't necessarily blame the elected officials who do that, though, because that's inherent human nature. I mean, we get what we vote for. At the end of the day, the voters vote and they get to have their say. So you're not having enough people turn out in primary elections is the fundamental problem. I don't know if that'll ever change. So again, I don't want to go too far on the soapbox, but think you have to change the way the systems work. But ultimately, what you see, you're getting these people elected, to your original question, Dawn, that I think are only really worried, in a lot of cases, not everybody by any means, but only really worried about a very small percentage of their constituency, because that is the people who decide the primary for them. And that is driving a lot of their decision-making. And that's a very big problem.
So how complicated does the system get when a third of your voter base does not affiliate with one political party or the other? Like where does your election system sort of break down when, you know, a third of your voters feel sort of detached from any sort of candidate or position or ideology? Are they represented?
Go ahead, Chad.
I don't know that I mean, I don't know if you're talking about the independent voters for the most part, obviously. If you're talking about them, I'm not sure that they're breaking the system down so much as the system is inherently not designed to address those individuals or to empower those individuals. Now, again, in Arizona, you can vote as an independent in the primary, certain primaries, right? But it's still an extra hurdle you have to jump through. There's extra hoops. So it does disenfranchise people, I think, in some ways, or disconnect them in some ways from those individuals that are supposedly supposed to be representing them. And so, again, going back to what I said a minute ago, and I don't know if Stan probably disagrees with me on this one, but, you know, I think that you have to change the way we elect folks when it comes to a lot of these elections. I think that it's time for a change. I think the primary system is broken. And I said this earlier, I think if you look at other layers of government, city, county, other places, you don't see that hyper-partisanship as much in some of those places, because a lot of those places have a very different primary system. And it's not a winner takes all. It's not those types of systems. So we may need to start reflecting on how we can fix our system. And our system, I want to point out, is very different than almost any other modernized, westernized country on the planet. Most other governments have a very different election system than we do. So maybe time to take a look at that, because I don't think there's a fundamental way to address your question without actually reforming the system itself.
Stan, is the primary system broken?
My short answer is no, it's not broken. Broken's such a strong word. I don't feel negative about the new phenomenon of people feeling like they don't need to belong to a party in order to participate in the voting booth. I think somehow that it's got its own charm to it, and there's a certain license that has come to regular voters who say, I don't need to plug into that or that. And I think it's a part of the phenomenon of the new world we live in, where everything is custom to me, the consumer, and I'm just not going to identify directly with one party or the other. So I just take it for what it is. And I think the Republicans and the Democrats are going to eventually get to where they understand that they cannot win without bringing that person over, right? We're still in the early goings of this phenomenon, and the parties both are still nominating people that are red hot for the base, and then they take their chances in the general. I think that is going to evolve so that the party is thinking out loud, and voters are thinking out loud about, how do I win the general with my candidate? So no, I don't think it's broken. I just think it's changing. That's all.
So the percentage of independents in Arizona has been increasing year after year. Do you see that trend continuing to go up? And what does that do to us in a presidential election? Like, how do we become even more important when our stats are sort of unpredictable that way? You never know which way an independent's going to go.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and that's your base point, is that Republican voters, you kind of figure out where they are, Democrats same. But if 1/3 of the electorate, who does not turn out, I might add, in the same percentages as people that are registered to a party, but they're eventually going to.
In a general election?
In a general election, the turnout among independents is lower than Republicans or Democrats, which is yet another phenomenon. But how does it affect? We're about to have the world's best political science experiment in Arizona, if it comes to fruition, with our friend, U.S. Senator Kyrsten Sinema, running as someone unaffiliated against prominent partisan people in a three-way general election for the U.S. Senate seat. I think that is going to yield a lot of answers for your question. How does this work? What are we? I think eventually we're going to get to a point where if that phenomenon keeps going, the parties shrink and the independent voter gets larger, that we're just going to have independent candidates run and win. And Kyrsten Sinema is perhaps the first one that is going to prove that it can be done. She's launching from a Democratic stage and an incumbency stage. But someday we're going to have people out of the phone book that can raise money and use their own dynamicism to run as non-affiliated people.
So independents are perceived as being moderate, either moderate on the left or moderate on the right. Is that true? Because I think that if people work off of that supposition and they communicate that way, they're going to lose that group. Chad, you're nodding your head no to me.
No, that's absolutely not true. I mean, there are independents out there that are independent because the Republican Party is not far right enough for them. There are independents out there that are independent because the Democratic Party is not far left enough for them. Independents in the middle. There's independents who don't like either party, whatever. But again, this goes back to my point, though. I think is that, and again, I'm not saying we have to blow up the system, but I think we're at a place in time as a society in general where it's hard to put somebody in one or two boxes. Like, you're either this or this. That's how we created our political system in this country, which is now, over a couple hundred years old. I know plenty of people who don't fit into the Democratic box these days or the Republican box these days. I know plenty of people who may be a Republican who actually care about climate issues. Stan is not one of them, but I know some of them.
Cheap shot.
Yeah,
let it be noted.
I know plenty of people who on the Democratic side care about issues that probably traditionally fall on Republican, like public safety, for instance. It's hard to define people by a label now, either you're D or an R. And our system is still built for that. And I know we disagree on this, but that I think is the fundamental problem. I'm not saying it's a bad thing that people are becoming independents or becoming whatever. That's great. That's part of the evolution. But somehow I think the system has to adapt to that and change. And there's ways to do it, but we're not doing that. So it makes it, I know to your point, I mean, you're saying that, there's going to be more independents running and they're going to pull it off eventually and things like that. But it's inherently harder to run for office if you're an independent in our system right now. It just is for qualifying for the ballot reasons, for money reasons, for media reasons, all kinds of things. It's just very hard to be an independent and run for office. Or any other party, Green Party or no labels party.
I think it's because people aren't there yet. I mean, no one's stopping.
But I don't think the system's there either.
Well, Kyrsten Sinema is about to test all of what Chad just said.
Yeah,
she'll be able to raise money. She'll have all the media attention she wants. And she'll have all the signatures in a heartbeat because of the energy she brings to the table. So we're going to get something that's going to prove out.
Well, I agree with you that it's a good experiment, but she's an incumbent. I mean, doesn't she already have an advantage going in? She's got great name ID.
Yeah. I don't think, or this is my personal opinion, I don't think she did herself any favors in her reelectability by leaving the Democratic Party. My own judgment. It's a much safer play to stay as a Democrat and fight it out in the primary and then coast through the general. If she wins, she will have broken through the fourth wall. And we've not done that in Arizona in a meaningful office ever. So I consider it a very big deal.
Well, so I'm going to change gears a little bit and talk about, you guys do debate TV all the time. I see you on TV, either you're arguing with each other or arguing with somebody else about a myriad of issues. So I want to talk about the media's role in this perception that the public has around government institutions and elected officials. To what degree have they really skewed people's opinions of our democracy, of our political process, of how we develop public policy? Has it really, are they to blame in some part for the polarization that we're seeing in this country?
Yes. Go ahead. Okay. Your turn.
I can start. Yeah.
And why? I guess I should say how. Right. I mean, the answer is yes, but I mean,
But I mean, first of all, you have to define what media is now. And that, I think, that's a hard question now. So again, I mean, we can talk about, we can talk about the Fox News issue with Dominion. And I mean, obviously, there you go. I mean, that's proof right there, or at least probably going to be proof right there that they were influencing and using their position to put propaganda out there, for lack of a better term. But that's a big media conglomerate type of operation. What about the average person who has 100,000 followers on Twitter and claims they're a media person? What about the person who has a blog? Whatever. I mean, media is so watered down now, and everybody has the ability to reach millions of people on the globe now through their phone. And quite frankly, that I think is a problem.
It is a problem.
And again,
oh my God, you agree?
I know. But I don't know what the answer is, because again, I'm not promoting censorship either. But it is hard to verify information as a normal person nowadays. And if you're on Twitter, you're on Facebook, whatever it may be, and you see all these sources coming at you, and you don't know if they're verified or not, you know how to get fact check and things like that. It is now starting. I mean, it is really starting to diminish what people can discern is real and what's not real in politics, let alone we can go down to AI stuff and deepfakes and all that.
Yeah,
later
right.
On.
I mean,
it's problematic, and I don't know where the answer is. Though,
yeah, I don't
frankly.
either.
Yeah.
I don't either. But Don, I would say in context, the media has always been thus. It's always been about selling newspapers or getting eyeballs and advertising. And you don't have to go back too far. In fact, you could go all the way back to the beginning of the country to see how polarizing the media was. It's never been any different than it is now. The traditional media, the Walter Cronkite era, there was this sweet spot of influence and trustedness came and went. It wasn't there before. It's not there now. And the traditional media is a lot more impotent than it once was, and has been supplanted by social media and the ability of no entry dollars to influence millions of people. And so it's a frustrating problem for everyone in the public square, because the way gossip and lies can move pushed by your opponents. But it's a phenomenon that in one part or another has been here since the beginning of the country.
And I've heard some of my fellows talk about the value addedness of social media as well, because it gives entree to ordinary citizens to actively engage in their democracy, actively voice their concerns and opinions, which sometimes translates into action. So it's a kind of a contrast, right? What's helping us advance as a citizenry in terms of being more engaged is also hindering our ability to be educated and informed to make decisions, almost like a vicious circle.
Right. Yeah, technology's helped a lot. I mean, you can sign petitions now electronically.
Agreed.
You can register your name at the legislature as pro or con a bill, sitting in your underwear in your mom's house, and no one knows who you are, but they see your name along with other names. And so it's a two-sided coin. It's got its bad parts.
Yeah.
It's got its good.
Yeah. Let me be clear again. I think that giving people easier access to engage and get informed and participate is a wonderful thing. And it's done great things here in the country and other places around the world. And we should figure out how to strike that balance, though, to allow for that individualized engagement and that ability to participate with somehow figuring out how to verify, though, or at least mitigate the impact of misinformation and disinformation out there. And again, I mean, on an international scale, I mean, you look at what Russia's doing, you look at what China's doing, they're using this type of stuff to their advantage right now. So we have to figure out how to balance it out. How do you allow for these technologies to empower people and to participate and improve their lives, while also, though, limiting the ability for people to mislead those same people and in many cases convince them to vote against their own well-being or do things that are against their own self-interest.
Some would argue the government should get involved, huh?
I know Stan's not going to argue
That's kind
that.
of where I felt he was going, and I was going to step in.
I wanted to set you
I was
up
going
for
to
that,
save
Stan.
everyone from that, but I didn't.
Yeah, so, 20 years ago when I joined the Capitol Corps, there was, as staffers, we were sort of encouraged to get to know each other, work across the aisle with our partners on the other side, and we would have drinks, and some of us dated, and some of that. I wonder, and I'll use you guys as a personal case, your friends, your professional colleagues. Do you find that is it harder for you to be friendly to one another in the political community knowing that, you're a Republican, Stan, and you're a Democrat. Do your Democrat friends get mad that, you are, you would work on a project with Stan, for example, or that would maybe advance an idea, like, criminal justice, for example? That was something that crossed, party lines. Do you feel that has become a hindrance on people from two different ideological stances actually being able to be friends and connections and neighbors?
Well, as a professional, as a hired gun, as a mechanic politically, the answer is no. I don't feel any negativity around that. In fact, there's actually a positive around it out in the real world. But in the legislature today, unlike when I was there back in the early days, there is a real peer pressure and punishment for doing exactly what you've said. The 7th grade junior high game on the playground is exacerbated and is much more painful and obvious now than it used to be. So that if some members of the one caucus see a member with the other caucus in too friendly a manner, then they're taken to the woodshed, or they're asked pointed questions about what are you doing with this person. That seems ridiculous, especially in a legislative environment where the whole thing depends on trust and people interacting. But that is real today at the Arizona legislature, and it is a real problem.
Yeah, I would agree. When I was down there, which again wasn't that long ago, it was only 10 years ago. I was the minority leader for 4 of those years. I was down there and worked with 2 different speakers with Kirk Adams and Andy Tobin, and we did not agree on a lot of things. Myself and the other speaker, shocking, right? But we had a very respectful relationship. We would meet outside of the Capitol and talk things through and just socialize sometimes and understand each other's points of view and our motivations for what we were doing and really just get to know the person on a human level. I think if you try to do that nowadays, in many cases, somebody would come by with their cell phone, take a photo of you, put up on Twitter, fill in the blank, this person's a party traitor, and we have to oust them in the primary. And next thing you know, you're getting primaried. No matter what the intent of that conversation you may or may not have been having with that person. And that goes back to what I said earlier, like compromise is viewed as a bad thing in politics now. And people always, here's the thing people really mess up, I think, and they equate compromise with selling out your values. And those are 2 very distinct things. You can compromise and keep your values intact. In fact, you should. And that's what most good leaders do. But somehow people have conflated compromise as selling out your values. But anyways, I think the fundamental problem we have right now, not just in Arizona, but in America, I think the other, I don't want to, not me, but I'm saying if I'm opposite you, hypothetically, I view you as the enemy now all the time, and you view me as the enemy all the time. And we forget that we probably have a lot of shared interests and a shared common set of values. We just have a different solution on how to achieve that goal we're trying to achieve. But now it's a zero-sum game, and it's just attack.
Yeah, and bipartisanship is not rewarded by voters.
No, not at all.
And that's the difficult. Bipartisanship as an act in the legislative process is not rewarded by voters. In fact, it will be used against you. And so that is part of the phenomenon here, is that we do, as Chad said, get the government we deserve. And right now, the public is as divided as it appears the government is. Everyone's got a story about people who we no longer associate with because of your position on Donald Trump, one way or the other, good or bad. It's such a weird, divorces, you name it. It's such a strange phenomenon time we're living in. I think we're going to look back on it and realize it was a fever that had to break at one point. It couldn't sustain itself. I hope this comes and goes, because the big secret, the untold secret, is that the government runs on trust, on individuals trusting one another enough in authentic action to move forward. And without that, it will break down and stop. And I don't know what happens when that happens.
No. Well, our business at the center is developing civic leaders, encouraging them to enter state level politics and public policy to strive to have a seat at the table, use their expertise, and contribute to solving the challenges. And I may have buried the lead a bit when I introduced you, but the two of you serve as a very important component of our training that we do for our civic leaders. Within our academy, you facilitate all of our public policy conversations in a way that's realistic and true to life by infusing the political element into the conversation. So we can be talking about education as a concept and quality and whatever, but the two of you bring this facet of real life thinking that exists when policymakers are making that decision. You are the best reviewed in our survey. You are the heart of our program, and we are really excited to have you. Stan, you've been with us since 2016. Chad, you've been with us since 2019. You've seen at least 5 cohort of fellows. You've seen about 3. Tell me what your impressions are of the quality of the fellows once they leave our little schoolhouse. Do you feel that training kind of gives them an ability to understand what they're getting into in civic life, and your interactions with them specifically, are they changed because of it?
Yes, and yes. It's been among the most fulfilling professional experiences I've ever had to be a part of the Flinn-Brown Civic experience. And there are selfish reasons and there are abstract reasons. The selfish ones are easy because I'm meeting some of the greatest people from around the state, from Page to Patagonia, that I would never meet normally. And some of them end up in my world directly as legislators and key staffers and then on the governor's office, at the legislature. And isn't it handy for me to be able to have their phone number and to have that trust relationship already built in when they're now making decisions? And I have story after story about that, where the great unmolded clay came out and went into the real world, and the trust relationship we built gets to play itself out, and I get to watch them do their thing. And having seen them perhaps timid or less confident as they stepped into the first part of the arena through Flinn-Brown. Somehow there's another couple of components. You managed to attract great people to begin with, so the universe is really a solid. But the geographic diversity and elsewhere that comes to it, I think is probably the best part. What it does is give someone the soft permission, not that they need it, but the soft permission and the confidence to step further into the arena. And hopefully they hold on to the key lesson that Chad and I are trying to give to them, which is to be your authentic self and to act with integrity as you do the best you can, and that the other guy's not your enemy. It's just part of the self-governance. And so I'm a big cheerleader for the organization and hope to be a part of it for as long as you'll have me.
Yeah, I would agree with everything Stan said for the most part. And I think one of the things I love about the program, and I see this when we start and then get through the final weekend of the program, you start to see people understand, to your point, that just because somebody has a different background, maybe they're from rural Arizona, maybe grew up on a farm, West Phoenix, whatever. We have very different perspectives. You start to realize, though, it doesn't mean we don't want the same thing, which is the best outcome for Arizona. And again, maybe we have different ideas of how to get there, but just getting to that basic level of understanding that we all kind of want the same thing for our families and our friends and our state. I think that's the fundamental component of trust, to Stan's point. And I also think they understand how complicated government can be after they go through this program, which I keep saying, I feel like anybody that runs for office should have to go through this program. It should be like mandatory training, because we said this earlier, making good policy is not black and white. A lot of times it's a big gray area. I don't care if it's about water, education, criminal justice, healthcare, whatever it is, right? It's not easy. And there's so many different layers of government involved. There's the private sector involved. There's a nonprofit sector involved. There's just all of these different components involved. And I think a lot of people don't know that before they run for office. They think it's going to be this very simplistic thing where I'm going to give money over here and I'm going to do this over here. And they kind of get, I think, overwhelmed when they take office. I always tell people who are running for office is hard. The harder part is actually being in office. That's the hardest part of running for office, is actually getting elected and then serving. So I think this program really does lay the foundation for people to understand that complicated nature, and not just for electeds, it's for staff, for other people, like you, nonprofit directors, things like that. But it really gives them a comprehensive, I think, understanding of how complicated this is. And as they interact with their fellows in the program who may have a different viewpoint, they understand why it's complicated and why different viewpoints may actually be a good thing if we listen to each other and work with each other.
And I like the way, I think the superpower of the event is to give this different group of people who've never met one another, put them in a room and put some of the most difficult issues right in front of them and give them permission to be open-minded and not be defensive. And I think that is the magic of it. And I'd like to think Chad and I play a small role in that, because people may have an expectation that Mr. Democratic leader and Mr. Republican senator might just want to stand up and trade blows.
And sometimes we do.
And sometimes I do want to choke the life out of him, but that's a whole nother broadcast. But I love that moment when people start to realize I don't have to defend what I walked in with. I get to listen to Chad, Stan, my fellows, the presenters, the state's best experts, and then I get to allow myself to change my mind, to have a different opinion, and hopefully get that baseline thing of this is more complicated and nuanced than I ever thought, because running for office is not nuanced. It's black and white, and so it's a great entree to civic life.
Yeah, admit it though, Chad. You like watching them beat Stan up. Huh?
Oh yeah,
I mean, that's the fun part of it.
Yeah.
What? I mean, he encourages it. What do you mean?
He does. Well,
sometimes, yes.
So thank you so much for being here today. This was a great conversation around civic life here in Arizona, what folks can plan on seeing and interacting with as they enter political life or policy life. We're really grateful to have you part of the Flinn-Brown Fellowship. Certainly as we go into our cohort here in the fall, there's going to be plenty to talk about. So thanks again for being our guests on Leadership Forward for a Better Arizona.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
That wraps up this episode of Leadership Forward. You can find out more about the work of the Arizona Center for Civic Leadership at our website, azcivicleadership.org.